Welcome to Section 2. Section 2 will be covered in 7 parts. We are in the first part. Section 2 is about the PRINCE2 Agile principles, meaning based on the PRINCE2 Project Management principles, we are going to understand them from a PRINCE2 Agile perspective. We will also go through all the practices in detail, beginning with the business case practice, then organization, plans, quality, risk, issues, and progress, and conclude with the PRINCE2 Agile rules in particular. And then we will also look at the various artifacts and roles that work in each of the practices. There will be 16 questions in the exam from this section 2 overall, including all the 7 parts that we will go through. And we will now begin with the first part here, which will be particularly about the PRINCE2 Agile principles, how they work from an Agile perspective. These are based on the PRINCE2 Project Management principles, but tailored to PRINCE2 Agile for the Agile environment. And then we will also cover the business case practice, the first to start with as a practice. We have a series of tables. These are all taken from the book, but I'm going to explain these to you briefly. You might recollect there are 7 PRINCE2 project management principles, and let us see how they apply to Agile. The first one is to ensure continued business justification, meaning every project needs a business justification at the start and throughout the project. Now, in Agile, the term value is used instead of benefit in general. Value could mean something of importance to a stakeholder. It can be a combination of the outcome or the result after using a set of products. It can also include the consideration of risks and also the investment required. Benefits, as we know, these are measured outcomes. So in Agile, there is the concept of the MVP, minimum viable product. This is to be considered when looking at the continued business justification of the project, which means there should be a bare bones or a skeleton product that should be considered first and see how that works before continuing further. Because if the MVP fails, then the project is not worth investing in. So for example, an online service, a website, can have a simple home page or a landing page which describes the service. And one could check if there are sufficient number of visitors to that website and who are showing interest in that service. But if nobody is visiting or hardly anyone visiting that website, there is no point in proceeding further with that initiative. Now, MVP need to be tested on real customers and it's not a internal test. Therefore, MVPs should be generally safe for the users as well. And it should be a quick learning from the feedback. So customers might find it good through their behaviors, or they might not find it okay. So that feedback should be considered to drop the project and change direction. Second one, learn from experience. As we know, this happens at the beginning of a project, during, and at the end to transfer knowledge or learnings to other projects for the benefit. In Agile, this is quite key. Here in particular, the feedback loops are more frequent rather than at longer durations. And users are generally continually involved. There's continuous business involvement. Therefore, the feedbacks are quite frequent. There is inspection of the product after each short delivery, where an increment is given to your customer, potentially for the use. And there's also inspection of the way of working of the team, of the Agile delivery team, in terms of their behaviors, their processes, tools, etc. And there should be adaptation or improvement based on these feedbacks. So these are known as retrospectives events in general. So it could be that the consideration whether we need to have a 2-week delivery cycle or a 3-week delivery cycle, meaning an iteration should yield a product increment every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And depending on that, the retrospective will happen either at the end of 2 weeks or at the end of 3 weeks. And it's possible that the project team may decide that a 3-week cycle would be more better to get some lessons rather than being able to get them at the end of 2 weeks deliveries. The third one is about defined roles, responsibilities, and relationships. So this should be properly done in PRINCE2 Project Management. However, in Agile, there may be additional roles. For example, we will see later on in the organizing practice or organization practice, we have the chief product owner, who is actually equivalent to the senior user. And we have additionally, we have the team coach. And we also have the product owner, who is equivalent to the team manager. So this has to be done cautiously, depending on the needs of differing agile ways of working. And this needs to be understood by everybody in the project. Next, we have managed by stages, wherein every Prince2 project has uh, its planning, monitoring, and controlling on a stage-by-stage basis. However, in Agile, we have the concept of releases. So, for example, a release is nothing but a product or a product increment that is delivered to a customer for the use. And usually, releases are more frequent. Typically, a release, an official release may happen every 2 to 4 months. Now, one might think 4 months, it's quite long from an agile perspective. But then again, within the 4 months, the customer may have a right to obtain a product increment at the end of any iteration. So a 4 month release might have 4 iterations, one each one of a month each. So there may be a delivery at the end of each month, but the customer may not be ready to accept those delivery at every month end. So they prefer to accept delivery at the end of 4 months, which is their release. Now, these releases should synchronize with the stages, meaning you could have one release every stage, you could have two releases every stage, and these are generally shorter stages because we expect in the agile world that the deliveries are more frequent. So, as an example, there could be an unconventional marketing campaign for a new perfume, which will take several months, but it's being delivered incrementally. And the stage could be just 2 weeks long. And so that if it is found that the project is not so viable, then the project can be stopped. So maybe at the end of first 2 weeks or the second 2 weeks and so on, depending on where the viability drops, the project can be stopped so that the money lost by the project will be kept to a minimum. So this is how managed by stages can be applied in an agile environment. Then we have managed by exception, which is mainly about defining tolerances in Prince2 project management and having a method by which escalation happens to the upper level of management in case there is a likelihood of violating a tolerance, such as a cost tolerance or a time tolerance and so on, for at a stage level or a project level or even at a iteration within a stage. Now, in Agile, this becomes even more important because Agile is about empowerment. So layers below in the management layers of project management should be definitely empowered, that they have more authority to make their own decisions. However, some tolerances should be set so that they can always escalate above to obtain support. Because exception management is mainly to make people aware that the upper management is there to support them whenever needed. But then do not escalate if things can be decided at the lower level itself. Here, particularly, even though managed by exception can be done for all the Prince2 project management targets, the 7 targets, but here in Agile, the emphasis is more on tolerance on the scope rather than time and cost, and tolerance on the quality, meaning tolerance on what are the mandatory products, what are the optional products, and so on. Whereas generally, time tolerance will be zero because iteration durations will be fixed, stage durations also will be fixed, project duration will also be fixed. However, there'll be some flexibility allowed even in Agile, depending on the quantum of agility in the overall agility spectrum. Similarly, cost is fixed because if each iteration is of the same length and the same number of people, and the cost can be worked out easily. Of course, in some of the iterations or delivery cycles, there may be some additional expenses which can be forecasted. For example, having to purchase some equipment or so on. A good example of this is that a prototype is created, which can be demonstrated at a trade fair, but it must happen on a specific date. And therefore, It's possible that the prototype functionality can have some tolerance on what is to be delivered, but the delivery date is fixed. So there is zero tolerance on the delivery date because the show is fixed as an event on a specific date.